All right, welcome everybody to our regular scheduled City Planning Commission meeting. Today is Wednesday, August 7th, 2019. It is 5:15 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. You have an agenda in front of you. I don't think there's any additions to that agenda, so we'll be just looking for a motion to approve that agenda.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Keelan, second by Olson, that we approve the agenda as printed. Discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carried. You have 2 minutes of meetings. We had the public hearing on July 10th, and then we also had our regular meeting on July 10th. Again, we would just be looking for a motion to approve and place these on file.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Fair, second by Barrett, that we approve the 2 minutes of the meetings from July. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carried. All right, so we're on to the action item, and this has to do with the River's Edge, or Oz Natural Area, as we remember that. And Andrew, I'm going to let you lead us through that.
Okay.
I know that we have a memo in our packet, which is on page, Sandy didn't give me a page 11. And it comes from Russ, but this was actually a combination of Russ and Andrew and Kathy have prepared that memorandum. Russ Van Gumpel is our interim administrator, and he's the one that actually prepared this memo. So,
Okay. So I guess let's just kind of walk through through this. Essentially, after that last meeting, we looked at a bunch of different options. I laid out 6 or 7 of them, and last week, Thursday, I believe, it was decided to go with this, what's in the current memo here, which describes the Oz Natural Area as being essentially zoned I-2 heavy industrial, describes the purpose of the district and principal uses. The heavy industrial, as we know, doesn't provide grazing. The one district that we have currently that does provide grazing as a right is the Resource Conservation District, and so we described that in the memo here, intended to be used to prevent disruption of natural man-made resources and protect areas, sensitive areas, blah, blah, yada, yada, yada. Principal uses talks about conservation, preservation, special uses. It identifies grazing, and so I guess because in terms, so anyways, so I guess this clearly is a district that is compatible with grazing, which is what the landowner is proposing to do. What we have as far as discussion on the table, grazing is permitted in this resource conservation district as a special use. We looked at the future, in terms of future land use, kind of did a little review looking at the map. I don't know if you want to pull those up, Justin.
You want the preferred land use?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So we wanted to
May
kind
take a
of
while to.
Oh, does that take a while to load? So I've also got a map back there with the preferred land use on. You can probably see.
You're gonna have to probably describe the color.
Okay, so I believe the light beige is the resource, is like a conservancy district, yeah, that future land use is identified as conservation.
The green is the conservation.
Oh, the green is I thought it was the whole,
No, the green is, the yellow is residential.
I think green is like a wetland or
Oh, it's a
environmental
wetland?
attribute. I think that, I believe according to the,
Except the tan looks like that's, if that includes guts around there, that looks like that's industrial, isn't it?
I believe she's right, that's the I2.
I believe if you clicked on that parcel, the beige, that would show that as a conservation. And that northern swath of the parcel, there's two parcels here under consideration, so. Does that allow you to identify that attribute?
No.
Oh, you're right, Andrew, it says conservation. It's either conservation or mixed use, I can't tell. It looks like it maybe is conservation or tan.
Carrie,
So the tan is conservation.
Carrie, you can't speak unless you speak in front of a microphone. And
I believe, okay, I can use this. I believe according to the preferred land use map, the physical copy I have here that I printed off that Rhonda gave me, it shows this as being light beige with a water body, surface water body on there. But the entire,
Andrew, make sure you're speaking in your mic, too.
oh, sorry. But it's shown as conservation, C, so it's like a light beige on the map. That is the map. Yeah, so, yeah, that's the same map I'm looking at right there.
So what's the yellow then?
The yellow's residential, single-family residential. So when you guys did this comp plan, your last comp plan, in like 2007, 2008, something like that, you did a future land use map. And sometimes when they do these future land use maps, they'll cut across and divide parcels like that. Because you never, yeah, anyway, some communities do that. Obviously, that's what you guys did here. Yeah, so that northerly, both of these parcels do show single-family residential as the preferred future land use. So, and how that would work today would be if an owner were to come forward and ask to change the zoning to residential zoning up here, you'd more than likely allow that to occur because it's in accordance with your future land use map. So a little bit more interesting background on the site. Adds a little bit more detail to this. So again, as this memo is kind of written out, based on the staff discussion last week, it made the recommendation to rezone the parcel to resource conservation district that would allow grazing as a special use in that district. The potential goes on to say the potential rezoning is also compatible with the city's preferred land use map, which I believe is true, since we're talking about resource conservation district and a future land use we've identified as a conservancy. And then it goes on to say the recommendation obviously would require a plan amendment, so you'd have to do a plan amendment to update the comp plan as well as the rezoning. So I guess there you have it in a nutshell.
And Andrew, just so I and the rest of the commissioners understand, when you talk about resource conservation changing, you're only talking about one of the parcels?
Well,
Or are you talking about both of the parcels?
I didn't write this memo, but
What are your thoughts?
what are my thoughts? I mean, one thought is to maybe just look at doing the conservation district on the southern parcel, the large parcel on the south with the water body. I don't know if that is the principal area where the owners want to do the grazing, but if it were, that would certainly end up being a compatible, designation, and then leave. I don't know where the planned grazing was intended for, if it was more that upland area on the way north of the site or the Sutherland site, but it would, to me, it would, in my estimation, based on what they did, kind of try to reconcile the future land use map and the existing zoning. It does make more sense to do the conservancy on that southerly parcel, and then maybe look in the future at rezoning that northerly parcel to allow for other uses that may be desired, or more, in line with the future land use plan, city's comp plan. And I should also go on to say, as you guys know, but just to remind you again, you are going to be updating that comprehensive plan and probably your zoning ordinance here in the next year or two. So you'll obviously have another kick of the can at that point in time.
So, if we talk just about the southernmost lot, since that one is pretty clear that resource conservation would make sense there, then for them to be able to graze on there, they would need to request a special use permit from the city planning commission, and then they would be allowed to graze.
You could set it up, one would imagine setting it up something along those lines with some conditions of having a management plan or,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, all right.
So how much of this that I'm looking at, is this, everything that in this parcel now is heavy industrial?
Yeah. Both the two parcels are zoned,
I too.
I2,
I-2.
yes.
Okay, and from reading the memo, I now that I'm looking at it, I'm trying to figure this all out. So everything that we're looking at on the parcel would be changed to conservancy according to the memo?
Oh, there's two parcels there, and it talks about rezone parcel. It doesn't the memo that Russ put together does not specify which parcel. It says the parcel.
Or it could be one or both.
Could be one or
That's
both.
That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
Okay, and I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out here. And is the black line that runs in between there, is that the one and or the other?
That would be correct.
Okay. So we got a kind of a southern and then a northern.
Right.
Comment?
I see that Ms. Esbenson is in the audience tonight and wonder how this stacks up with her expectations. Could we hear input from her?
Sure. Kari, please give your
Thank you,
name.
Alan. My name is Kari.
Thank you. Let me set you up here first.
Okay.
Please give your name and address and then go ahead.
Okay. I'm Kari Espenson. My address is 124 East Lake Street, Waupaca. Both those parcels belong to us. They're two separate parcels. I'll just be honest, the memo that came out kind of blindsided us a little bit. I didn't find out about it until late this afternoon. The memo that we had originally seen had laid out various different options and kind of pros and cons. And my husband and I had had a meeting with Andrew as well as Kathy, and then a follow-up phone meeting with my husband and Andrew just prior to his drafting a memo, which identified various different options and pros and cons. And one of the things that we talked about with Andrew that we're concerned about the conservation district that is in the memo that you received is that it does not allow for the construction of any structures whatsoever. We would have to get approval through a special use to graze, but it does not allow for construction of structures. And one of the things that we need the flexibility to be able to do is put up a structure that provides housing for animals in the event of inclement weather, also access for water and electric. And the other thing is that we've been doing a lot of discussion about legacy planning. Our daughter Hannah, who's come and presented before you on several occasions, just got accepted to graduate school at UW-Stevens Point in the wildlife department. She has an interest in the long-term stewardship of this property, but what we've talked about is it really would benefit from having a caretaker living on site. The amount of work involved with invasive control is extensive, and again, if this were to go entirely into conservancy zoning, that would prohibit the construction of a house on the site. And at this point in time, we need to have flexibility to determine where it would make sense to put these structures. And what we would be doing is balancing, trying to, a big part of our concern is not wanting to encroach upon the aesthetics of the area. We want to keep it beautiful and looking natural. And, but what we also have to balance with all of that is accessibility for those services like water and electric, and making sure that it's financially viable to do so, both for a structure that would house the animals, but also for it would also be important if, our daughter decided to build a home out there and live there. And so at this point in time, we actually do not feel comfortable with the conservation zoning proposal, other than the wetland. I wouldn't see any problem with that. Wetlands are protected anyway, and that wouldn't be a buildable area, and that's natural that would be
Okay,
conserved.
let's stop right there just for a second, if I could. So what you're saying, and I'm going to use a visual.
Yeah.
That helps me. So if something came like here, and I'm just using very generally.
Yeah.
And this area was conservancy, that would be kind of what you're talking about.
The wetland area, yeah, where it's wet,
I'm assuming that's this area.
there is some buildable land that comes out to Constance Road on the east side of the wetland, so we would want to exempt that, but the wet,
Basically, it's over here.
yeah.
So
That's,
then, if that were the case, yeah, there might be a little buildable area.
and there is also up in the top,
But
Pat.
what would you think then would be up here?
Part of what long-term, my hope would be that could be conserved and managed as natural area. But again, some of what we need is the flexibility to find out, that's a drumlin out there, there's rock out there, if anybody's looking at building a house or structure, you got to make sure, you may have your ideal location based on solar and all these things, but, if you find out there's a huge rock out there that you can't, penetrate with a bulldozer, you're messed up, and then you may have to adjust it, 25, 30 feet or 100 feet a different direction. The other thing that I just learned about was the Gusmer expansion, and apparently they will be coming now fairly close to the property line. If maybe you guys could tell me exactly where that is. But I just learned that little road that goes up to the water tower is going to be now,
This is being vacated.
right, and then it's going to bump off to the east, and is that going to actually come along?
Come like this in general, right, Justin? I mean, in general.
Yep.
Okay.
Will that come next to our shared property line up there?
The building.
The road,
The road.
What's the shared property line?
the purple where it goes up or not?
Right
I don't
here.
know, or do we not touch there? I don't know. We don't touch.
The alignment's gonna follow this line here. The road will stay on basically this property here, but we'll do a land swap, so the road will go straight east and then turn and go straight south down to Ware Street. So there
Okay,
will be no connection to this property line up here.
Okay, that's what I didn't know. I didn't know. But what I was going to say, that's a sizable industrial expansion in the area, and that's another thing that, I talked to Pat, and he shared a little bit about what his understanding was, but, that's a sizable industrial expansion. We don't know how that's going to impact the neighborhood either in terms of noise, smell, truck traffic, all that. Pat didn't think there was going to be much, but I don't know much as a nearby landowner, and so there are all these things that we need to consider. You were smiling? I don't know what you.
Well, I was just gonna say that it's zoned I-2, and their expansion fits that zoning.
Right.
So that the intention of that zone and their industry, it fits
Right.
They're gonna
within
go right
that.
across here with the new building, and then the road will come here, but really, this whole piece stays pretty much as is,
Okay.
other than
Okay.
that expansion.
But what I would say again is, if my daughter were to build a house out there, or even with your future planning where you're talking about that area being residential, people who are building new structures want, especially if they're in an area that's close to I-2, they want to know what they're building near, because they're going to be concerned about noise and light pollution, potentially sound, traffic, all of those kinds of things. And so anyway, when we had our discussion with Andrew, we actually had talked about maybe the favorite proposal either being the ag designation, which I believe does allow for, small animal husbandry type activities. I think it also allows a caveat for, I was actually trying to get the ordinances off the website today. I have to say it's extremely hard to get them off the website. They're not clearly on the city website. But my past recollection, because I couldn't find them this afternoon, was that I think you're allowed like one either single or multi-family housing per 10 acres with an egg designation. Do you know, Andrew, do you remember? Because you were...
I'll take a look for what we're talking, but I don't know that off the top.
Okay. So that was one of the preferred, because that would give us some flexibility. The only thing is there's a fluke in I call it kind of maybe a historical fluke in that ordinance. It allows for cows in the city, which are big and have smelly, messy poop, but they don't allow for goats, which are small and don't have smelly feces. It's one of these odd things. And I know these are some of the weird things that you guys are going to try and work out with your new zoning stuff. But the egg, from our standpoint, would give us a little bit more flexibility in that it would allow for, a residence, but also allow for some animal husbandry and then conservation stuff out there. The other option would be for us to stay with I-2 and request a special use permit from you under that. And again, I couldn't find it because I couldn't find the zoning, the ordinances today. I couldn't find that. But when we mentioned this thing about our continued desire to use it as an educational site, an outdoor zoological garden, and all of that, which is continuing. That's an ongoing commitment we have.
Didn't the other slide show residential overlay and its preferred use? It's just part of that?
Yeah.
So that could be zoned as residential eventually anyway.
Yeah. The problem is residential doesn't allow for animals.
No, but what I'm saying is it's adjacent to the property. If you want to build a house in a residential zoned area that's adjacent to the property that you own, then I guess I don't see a problem with building a house if you get that rezoning.
You're saying if you did the conservation, you could still build a house
No,
because of what?
no, that's
See,
not
that's
what I'm-
Really
on,
what you're talking about, Ellen. See, this would remain is
That's what.
conservancy.
right.
But he's saying this yellow up here was suggested to be residential, is that correct?
The future land use
In
plan, yeah,
future
shows
land
that.
use
Yeah.
planning. So that what he's, I think, and I don't mean to put words in.
No, that's what I'm saying,
This
exactly.
would be available for building.
That's, an option for building a residence, and it's immediately adjacent to your property.
Yeah, that's not a problem. The only thing is that we can't have the animals in the residential, that's what I'm saying. You know, if we were going to honor the code, we'd have to stay in the brown area rather than being able to put the animals where we need to address the problems. That's what I'm saying about that.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
for a second? Okay. Yeah, and I just want to just be clear because it gets a little complicated. You know, that yellow showing on the future land use map as residential. But it's not indicating what zoning district it should be, right? Because where this was done as part of your comp plan. So there's different districts, right, that might allow residential. This ag district does, you know, I did find it. It's the first one in your thing. It does allow 1-family and 2-family farm residences, right? So for example, so that yellow could be covered underneath any number of different zoning, you know, districts that you have, you know, up there in the future. So just not to get too, you know, hung up on that aspect.
So you could maybe make it ag, and which would allow for both the residential as well as the...
Well, I'm just saying that in the future, when the city's probably in the next few years going to be redoing its zoning ordinance and redoing this map and redoing its zoning at the same time, then you could potentially rezone that. I'm just saying to agriculture. You could do whatever you wanted to at that point in time, but that would still provide a residential use kind of consistent with, you know, what was on here before. At any rate,
Kathy, you had a comment?
If we were to,
Look, I'm sorry, Kathy. I hate to trump you here, but Kathy.
No,
had her hand
that's
up, so,
fine.
Yeah.
I guess what staff was looking at is we were asked to provide the zone, a solution to allow the Espesons to be able to graze. And so we're looking at this as here, this is the option for them to do what they want right now, barring the fact that they want to do some future planning. At the same time, we're looking at changing our comp plan and our zoning, and maybe that at that time, when they're ready to expand, then that's when they can do what they want to do. But I thought that with the step, with what we were, how would you say,
our charged
to do, our mission was to be able to see what we could do without impeding any of our other zoning designations. Allowing grazing in I-2 could open a whole can of worms, and changing anything for allowing grazing within the city. I think by having this conservancy, this allows them to do what they wanted, what they first asked us to do,
the grazing, yeah.
the grazing.
Yeah, animal shelter, though, is another issue that I hadn't thought about before when we were talking about this.
But we were also looking at the Kaukauna option where they bring them in and they truck them out. And so it's one of those where it's not that it's permanent, it's a service to do what they want to graze, to remove the invasive species. It's not that we're going to house them on there. It's they have a place where their goats are kept. They bring them in and they allow them to do what they're asked to do, which is remove the invasive species and then take them off. I think that's what their original request was of the city, and I think that us looking at the different districts without impacting the rest of the city, that this was why staff made this recommendation.
Kathy, I just want to clarify that our desire was to have a longer-term commitment because we know this is a long-term process. And, you know, shelter even was a concern, I think, in some of the ordinances that you provide adequate shelter for your animals. So even if I bring them in there for the grazing season for 4 or 5 months, I need to have a place where they can get out of the elements. And I also need to have water, and I've got to have electric. I've got to have electric to run the fencing to keep them contained sufficiently. And I got to have water to run a pump. or I've got to have electric to run a pump to get them water. So all those things are, concerns. Yeah, could we haul water in? Yeah, it's, it's something we could do. It's a pain. And one thing I'll just say is, this has been a long process, and we're starting to get kind of tired. And at some point, you start to say, is it even worth it?
Well, let's back up here a little bit, and maybe Andrew can answer the question. If we as a planning commission recommended that this entire area that we're talking about be placed into conservancy, could we also then, as a planning commission, allow for a special use permit which would allow for some structure?
I think you could, yeah, I don't see anything that would prevent it, from being written.
So we could, and I don't mean to simplify it too much, but we could kill two birds with one stone here by saying, okay, the whole piece is one, so that in the future, as Kathy suggested, we might want to change that, but right now it's all conservancy, but it allows for the special use for the housing of these animals, until which time maybe something more permanent would be, if you're
think
talking
one of
about
the-
residents, then we'd have to change it and have to come back. But at least it would give them the opportunity to do what they want.
I think the concern would be regarding, as you mentioned, wanting to maybe put a house out there at some point in time.
Well, at some point in time, if that were the case, she'd have to come back and we'd have to discuss it.
Rezone it.
Rezone.
So what Pat is saying, and I hope I understand him, is that if we zone the whole thing resource conservation, they could get a special use permit to allow grazing. There wouldn't be any, they could request to put a lean-to up or a barn or whatever you want to call it. They could certainly dig a well, because there isn't any city water out there, I guess. There is city water. So they would have to hook up to city water.
Where's the city water? Right on Ware Street?
It goes down, east on Ware Street and down Tower.
So you would have to connect to city water because you are in
Right,
the
which
city.
is going to be, yeah.
And then you
sounds
would,
like-
well, you have to connect to city water. You have no choice. And then you would have to get power in there, which you would be allowed to put power onto that property also, Andrew. Is that correct? Or, I mean, do you need time to,
Well, I mean, we'd have to update the zoning, provisions that relate to this. I think that could be done as part of the
so
process.
as it states right now, resource conservation, can they put a building on?
I don't believe so.
No, there's
don't
no
believe so.
future residential development.
Okay.
Well, no, we're not talking residential. We're talking, let me finish my sentence without everybody jumping at me here. So we're not talking a house right now. We're just talking, if they want to put on a lean-to or a garage or a barn or something like that, can they do that under resource conservation?
They are, it says, principal uses: fishing, hunting, preservation, conservation, forestry, wildlife preserve, hatcheries, and water retention. Special uses permitted after review, public hearing, and approval by the Plan Commission and Council: draining, grazing, orchards, truck farming, utilities, and wild crop harvesting. So it doesn't explicitly say.
But it doesn't, but a lot of those things that you listed would sort of assume that there's going to be
There's gonna
something.
be some ancillary
Some kind of
support
structure
services.
that goes with them. You aren't going to have a fish hatchery without some building along with it, so as an example.
So,
I'm
and
having a,
then, let me finish here. So then, if their plan in the future is to build a house, which you're not sure that you're gonna do that, but if you did build a house, they would be able to split off part of that parcel and have it as residential and be able to, and to be able to build a house there. How many acres is there? There's quite a few, right? And we don't require any more than, in the city, we don't require any more than a half an acre lot to build a house on. So that could be split off if we wanted to. Or
There's
if
a lot
they
of
wanted
land,
to.
there's a lot of land out there. It's a big, what is that parcel? It's
34 acres.
30.
Yeah, so I mean, they could just take a half acre if they wanted, or a full acre if they wanted to.
I'm having a hard time understanding why we couldn't just go with the egg zoning. I mean, the only thing that has to be changed about that is the goats. I don't quite understand why everybody's willing to change the conservancy special uses, but you can't just tweak the egg zoning for goats. I mean, it just seems sort of arbitrary to me. And I don't.
We're not changing the conservation, resource conservation.
Well, yeah, because you'd have to have a special use to allow for, you'd have to have a special use for the goats, first of all, because it's grazing has to be approved by special use. And it also the language doesn't allow for a structure without approval.
That's
So I
what
don't,
we were asking, though, and he's saying the language does not say that you can't put a structure on there. That's what you're saying, but that's not what Andrew is
okay,
saying.
well, I'll go back to that other ordinance that allows for zoological gardens and does allow for goats under the zoological garden stuff, and I don't understand why that's already on the books. Why couldn't we do it under that? That was the one that I presented at the last meeting. I don't understand it. It's already there. There was already a special use granted for animals, and goats were one of the animals, and as long as you provided adequate space and shelter and fencing and all of that, it seems to me like, I don't know, I don't understand the bias and the arbitrariness of interpretation of code and ordinances. It's very frustrating as a citizen, I'll just say that's trying to do the right thing. And I'll also just say that, when people are looking at building or putting a business in or whatever, you need to have a certain amount of certainty if you're going to invest in things. You're putting a lot of capital in, you're putting a lot of time in. We've been here how many times? And it doesn't, what I'm hearing is, well, maybe we could come back and request to have a place for a house. I don't want to come back again. I don't want to come back again. I feel bad bothering people. Your time. We've made so many calls. We're tired. So I guess it's up to you guys to decide. But I don't quite understand why we couldn't already do it under that existing code that allows for goats as long as they're properly housed. And
I think the reason that was because it wasn't allowed in that zoning district. There's some section of the code in here, and I don't know where exactly it is, but that that you're referring to, Kari. But I think that was the issue with that, was that it's not allowed in I-2 zone.
well, right, but we're talking about changing I-2 to conservancy. Why couldn't I-2 be changed to that? That's what I'm saying. You're already going to change it from I-2. And I don't understand why it's preferable to change it from I-2 to the conservancy, and then we got all this iffiness about stuff, rather than going, if we're going to change the I-2, why don't we go with something that already is on the books? I don't understand that.
You get
And
something.
or the egg zoning, which allows for both animals and allows for residents,
Okay,
then we'd
so-
already have that.
Thank you, Kari. Let us discuss this. You could stay there, that's fine, but let us discuss this, okay? Thank you. Kathy?
During our staff discussions of this item, one of the things that we also look at is what is the impact of what we're trying to do in this area to the whole city. So we do have other conservancy areas in the city that could possibly take advantage of the grazing opportunities. One of them was South Park, I believe. Andrew and Rhonda had listed Brainerd's Bridge, some of the other ones that even the city could opt into having goats grazed to remove invasive species. So when we look at stuff, we don't just look at this parcel. We also look at what can that decision of the planning commission and making that affect the whole city as a whole. Again, we don't want to get into spot zoning with the zoological zoning like we've done, that we may have issues with. So where do I come in with another property that wants to do zoological? And is that going to impact? So I think by having the fact that we have areas that will benefit by grazing in, the conservancy areas, and this was the original request, I think that's where staff came in and said, this is where it is. It's just been that each time we talk to the Espesons, it's one more thing, and it's another more thing, and then we're going in a different direction. So we keep shifting the item. So we were looking at allowing the grazing, instead of just a pilot program, be able to do that. And I think if we can find a way to allow her to put up a structure to house the goats, I guess that the problem I have with that is then I have properties in the city that are in non-compliance because they have a structure, but they don't have a primary structure with. So I think we need to be concerned about that also. One of them is the city because we have a garage on a vacant lot that we have to take down. So I think, before we make a decision that she can have the lean-to or whatever, or put any permanent structure, I think maybe we need to have more research on that option, but to allow her to do the grazing now, that fulfills the original request that they had given us.
Justin wanted to make some comments here, so.
Yeah, to answer your question on why the resource conservation is, the preferred land use points out resource conservation, and that's the direction, I guess, staff was making. So that's why I see why that land use was being recommended to be rezoned to, because it lines up with the preferred land use and then also allows the temporary grazing of goats. The house, which was brought up first time tonight, would still be allowed on the northern property because that could be future zoned to residential. So that's an avenue that solves both of those questions, comments.
But we could
You can
graze
have
on
the
that
temporary
now and
graze.
still,
If it's resource conservation, it can be temporary graze. And you can still get a house on the other section if it's rezoned residential. The zoological garden is a totally different subject. If we're going to get a company that comes in that has like a financial plan, insurance, building plans, wants to put a primary structure up there with footings, foundations, it's got to be utilities to it, sewer, water, then yeah, we work through that with development plans. We've seen that 100 times here. That's totally separate. Tonight was the first time we heard about the house. Last meeting was the first time we heard about the zoological garden. Prior to this, we heard about the temporary grazing of goats because we wanted to address the barberry. Once that's been addressed, we were told that the goats would be taken off.
Justin, I would like to clarify, zoological garden is a very broad thing. What we're talking about is native animals freely wandering there, not a zoo. It's a zoological garden, just like a botanical garden. That doesn't mean you have perimeter fencing keeping deer and birds in. It's what our whole mission has been about, using this to teach the community about native plant preservation, restoration, and management, plant and animal, and the threat of invasive species, okay? It was supposed to be an outdoor educational center. That's what it is. It's not something that is a zoo in the traditional sense with fences. If you go to the Arboretum in Madison at the University of Wisconsin, they don't have fencing all around it. You have a natural flow of wildlife in and out of it. That's what we're talking about, is using it as an instructional place to teach people about their environment. Okay, that's what we mean by zoological garden. It's consistent with what we've we've always had an interest in doing there. So I just want to set that straight. We're not talking about a zoo. I don't want a zoo. That's not it.
She asked about the ag. Kari, I'm going to ask you not to talk unless I ask you
Okay,
to.
that's fine.
Okay, so I can get through this here, and so that everybody else gets a chance. Thank you. She asked about the ag, okay? And as long as she asked about it, let's discuss that. I mean, is that an option, and what, does that open up a can of worms throughout the city? And do we need to know what the pros and cons of that being zoned agriculture?
I don't know. I should look. I mean,
That's okay.
I don't know how many different. I'll make a few comments on it. I mean, I don't know how many different other. I don't know how much. Do you have any ag properties in the city? I
Yeah,
think
we do.
You do have.
ag properties adjacent to Foxfire Golf Course. That's ag property. I think isn't at the airport, isn't that zoned ag also?
Adjacent, some of the adjacent.
Yeah.
So you've
Some
got
of
few.
adjacent areas.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have
Okay,
ag
so you
property.
know, kind of have some familiarity with it.
Yeah.
You know, it does provide the one-family and two-family farm residences. It does allow for crop, dairy, cattle, tree farming, subject to some except provisions, I guess. It includes also goats or shall not be permitted. The keeping or raising of poultry, domestic livestock, except for hogs and fur-bearing animals, customary accessory uses, passive outdoor public recreation, active outdoor public recreation, public services and utilities. And then under special uses, it does list a lot of, you know, commercial raising, propagation of animals, blah, 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 animal hospital, a bunch of stuff, archery ranges, bathhouse, beaches, boating.
But did I hear you say, I think one of the first things you said under ag is it does not allow for goats.
It doesn't, it's, yeah, it says, in the ag district, no building or premises shall be used and no building shall hereafter be erected or structurally altered unless otherwise provided in this chapter, except for one or more of the following uses. One family and two family farm residences, crop, dairy, cattle, and tree farming subject to the following: the keeping or raising of hogs, fur-bearing animals, or goats shall not be permitted.
So we can have cows out there, but not goats.
As it's currently written. I mean, you can amend, obviously, so that would.
Guess we could
That would
propose
require,
cows instead.
just while we're on the topic, you know, so the negative of that, it doesn't specifically allow for grazing as it's currently written, potentially could be flagged as, you know, instance of spot zoning coming in the middle of a, you know, I-2 district. The counter argument to that would be it does, you know, as we showed in the future land use map, I mean, it does show conservancy, it shows single-family residence. The ag district sort of provides for both of those in a sense. So I'm not sure, you know, that's completely in conflict with your future land use map. So that's not as big of a concern for me.
But these parcels right here are all ag now, are they not?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
They're
what,
all in the city.
No.
No.
Where the water tower is, yep, that's city. The blue square there, that's charter. That's in the city.
Is this?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, so there's some contiguous ag to this property though, because this is her line right here. Wait.
Yes.
Who owns this?
yes,
Sure.
that's both, they own,
Yeah.
Kari owns that, yep.
So it is contiguous to some agricultural.
There's also ag in the town across Constance Road, that's all ag. Which, it's in the town, but that's all ag too, that's ag within
This is in
transition.
the town of Waupaca.
Yeah.
All of that in yellow.
But the point is still that if we zone it ag, under the current rules, you can't have goats. So we still have to change our zoning
Right,
if we want to do something here.
right.
And resource conservation allows you to put goats on the property and to, on to try and get rid of the evasives. And that's what you wanted. I mean,
Right, but it's prohibitive to the structure, and we don't have a guarantee about the structure, so we have to go through a process of getting approval. And I will just say that unless we have a guarantee, we'll just drop our request altogether and just stay with I-2, which, as I-2, we can put up a structure out there. Even, we may not be able to graze, but we can put structures out there. So.
I really think that's up to you, what
Right.
you want to do with your
Right,
property.
and I, you know, what we've been asking is for others to share our vision and to, you know, we've asked for people to come out and walk the site so that you can understand the challenges of the site, the physical labor challenges, what we're trying to do out there, and to, you know, join in a shared vision. This is the future. This is where communities are headed towards sustainability, and that's what we're trying to teach our community. And we're just asking for cooperation in making that happen.
And that's what this recommendation is doing for you, though.
But it
That's what I'm
doesn't give
missing.
us the
I
assurance
can't-
of structures,
Don't
Brian.
speak over me. I let you talk when you want to talk. Let me talk. Don't give me the looks that you're giving me, or we'll just quit this and go on to the next section. It's only fair that you're nice to me if I'm nice to you. So, the resource conservation allows you to graze on this property. Andrew has even said that you could put a structure on here to house your goats. You're allowed to hook up to city water. You're allowed to put electricity on there. Those are all the things that you've asked for. That's even more than what you asked for, because quite honestly, if I remember right, the only thing you asked for is to do some occasional grazing on this property. That's all I remember you asking for. And this is what this is doing for you.
Yeah, you know, the other part of that, I think, Kari, is that if you are concerned about in getting a guarantee that you could put a structure and eventually do some more permanent, you would need a special permit. And I think that this body would probably allow for that to happen without too much difficulty, because we deal with special use permits all the time. But even if you wanted to just put up a house in the future, somebody did, you'd have to take out a building permit. And as soon as a building permit were to be an application, we would look at the site as we do all of the building permits to see whether or not it's applicable. So having to deal with a permit, quote unquote, is something that we deal with all the time. I think what the commission is saying here, look, we're trying to make this work for you by saying if it's all in conservancy now, and we had to look at a special use permit to do some of the things that you specifically would like, we could do that. In the future, if we wanted to do something in addition to that, yes, you might have to come back here. That's true. But that happens to most of the people who build in this city, regardless of what it is. First, they have to get a survey map, then they have to come in and show us their plans. It happens all the time. So, and I know you've been at this for a long time, but I think the bottom line is that we would probably be amenable to what you want by going through that process.
I appreciate that, Pat. I think it's just that we've had this experience of arbitrary interpretation of ordinances that makes us less than consistently trusting in what is going to happen. And we can't make a commitment without having some degree of assurance. And I don't think Gusmer would be expanding into a 33,000 acre building if they didn't have assurances that things were going to work. And that's true for individual families. And that's my concern. If it were all tied up ahead of time, we knew it was all done deal, then that would be one thing. But the only other thing I was just going to say, Pat, is where it's yellow for the residential. You know, some of those areas up there, if we left it with it as is, and we just went with a tan now, some of those areas are areas that we would like to have the animals move. So that's one of the downsides of not just dividing it as it is right now.
But that's true. That might be
Yeah.
true as we look at it. But if you had a plan that came in that said we'd like it another place, this commission may look at that seriously and say it would be workable. But you got to remember, we're also here as temporaries. You might come back to this building, to the city planning, and 5 new members might be here.
Right, exactly.
We're not here permanently here either.
Right,
And so we
exactly.
always look at the long-range picture because other people will have other ideas in the future.
Right.
So if we wanted to make changes, as Kathy said, it may have some impact on the rest of the city that we have to be conscientious of. Because we're not going to be here forever either.
I appreciate that. It's just that, again, as you said, people can change, and so their philosophies can change. And again, we need to have an assurance, and so anyway, I appreciate your time, and.
Well, you know
if-
what we can do here, excuse me for interrupting you, but I think you were done. What we can do is we could take your parcels of property, you can come back with a plan for exactly what you plan on doing on both of your parcels, and then we can work with it. The problem we have is we're not sure what you want, and I have a feeling you're not sure what you want either completely. So if you can come back with a plan for the whole 30-some acres, then we can help you to make sure that those assurance happen right away. I mean, we can do this special use permit to allow the grazing on there. We can have the future use of a residential there. We can have a barn put on there. All of those things can be there if we know what you want. But I think that's the struggle here. We're not sure what you want, and if you could do that for us, we can put something together that will make it work for you.
Can I chime in here? Just want to ask, so, somebody brought up earlier that parcel to the west of the north parcel is in the town, okay? And I was just curious if I could get some clarification on the likelihood, right, from a sort of infrastructure standpoint, that this in fact would be residential in the future. So, 15 years ago, somebody said this might be a nice place for residential, probably came out of a meeting one night, and somebody painted that across the parcels. Justin, I'm curious from your standpoint, knowing where the utilities are, sewer, water, future expansion, is it even in the realm of possibility that utilities are extended out to that northern parcel, or if there were utilities extended to either the parcels in question, where would they likely come from? And then my second kind of question to that is, if the owners ended up identifying an area within those 2 parcels for a residence or a farmhouse or a caretaker house that needed sewer and water, and it wasn't near sewer and water, are you allowed, what's the city's policy? Are you allowed to be on well and septic within the city limits, or do you have to be hooked up?
If the utilities are adjacent to the property, you're required to hook up. So this front would definitely require a hookup to sewer and water. The back, if it was separated, probably not.
Okay.
We have water that comes down Shambo Road here currently. Water and sewer out in Ware, down to Tower.
Okay, so
So-
that larger southerly portion, if there were going to be a home constructed there, would need to be tied to sewer and water. So it'd most likely be at that corner, right at that easterly corner. I think earlier, Kara, you said there was some flat land.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to clarify that as part of the equation as we're thinking about an ultimate sort of future land use plan out there.
Well, the first part of his question, though, Justin, what about those other yellow? Is feasible for that to be residential?
Well, it is. They're not in the city. To get city water out there, they'd have to annex in. So most likely what you're looking at for that to become residential is a developer to come around with a subdivision plan. And they would then pay for the infrastructure for that to go in, the road, the sewer, the water. But it could work. I mean, certainly water would work. topography looks like sewer would work as well.
You can see right in the township, just above that,
Right.
that is a subdivision, and quite honestly, for some of us that have been around a while, that actually was in the city at one time, and the developer asked that the property be detached because they could not get sewer and water to that property. And so they asked for a detachment, and at the time, right or wrong, the city granted them the detachment, and there are vacant lots out there, but there's probably 8 or 10 homes out there, I think.
Just on septic, on,
Just septic
Well.
and well, yep. Right. I mean, I think the only way we could ever get water there is probably to go down Constance, I would guess, or go across,
Or Shackles, maybe.
yeah. And we wouldn't be able to get sewer there, I wouldn't think, not without a huge lift station of some kind, or,
That's based on the topography, and since this is a hill, you could come down the hill this way with an easement, or purchasing land and making another road through there, something like that. But to get water up around Constance, or sewer, excuse me, yeah, you're talking a lift station that way.
yeah, and I don't know that the city at this time is looking to expand to the north of there, so.
Well, if we were to rezone this to Resource Conservation District, and look at whatever plan Kari might bring forward, can we do all that at once, or does this have to go through separate process?
Well, in my thought pattern, it's especially, I mean, I think we could do the resource conservation, rezone it to resource conservation, and she can request a special use permit at the same time. So we could get that all done at the same meeting, and if she has a plan ready, we could discuss that plan too, because that might affect how we zone some of that property too. She might want some of that property to be residential in there. And so,
Would that be a recommendation to the whole council, though, when we change the ordinance?
well, the
zoning.
special use permit is, does that go to council? I keep forgetting.
I don't think so.
No,
Special use permit, but the rezone would.
Yes.
The rezone all has to go,
Yeah.
and you have to,
Yeah.
I think you have to have a public hearing too whenever.
And
you
I don't think
rezone,
there's,
too.
in the code, I don't think there's a special use to put a residential home on a conservancy district. I mean, the conservancy district is, as I mentioned, the special uses are drainage, grazing, orchards, truck farming, utilities. So if we did slap the conservation on there, I mean, if you did rezone that to conservation, it would not be compatible with the residential use.
Well,
and I don't think that's an issue right now. I think we're just talking about a structure for
Animals.
housing the animals.
Right, sure, yeah.
Well, and the only problem we have with that, obviously, is going back to Kathy's issue, unless, and I don't know how this works on resource conservation, if they were to put up a temporary building, that could come down in the future, then we wouldn't have to worry about having a permanent structure without a residence on it. And I don't know whether you can do that or not. That would
I
be.
think that'd be kind of subject to some interpretation since it's not really clearly defined in the code
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So Andrew, just to be clear, that you're saying that a residence would not be compatible with the Resource Conservation District? That's what you're saying by the language?
Yeah, the current
Yeah.
zoning.
So we would have to then request zoning change again if we, at the time, we wanted to put a structure up, if we zoned all of it Resource Conservation District.
Right, but if you had a plan ahead of time, we could rezone a good portion of your property to resource conservation, and we could also rezone a parcel where you feel the residence is going to be at the same time to residential.
Yeah.
So you'd only have to do it at one time.
I just want to say, I apologize if it sounds like we're changing plans. We're really not changing plans. The thing is that what we were hoping to do is get the grazing going, because every year that you wait, you got the invasives are spreading more out there and become more problematic. And so we were hoping to get the grazing going with a longer term eye. And again, we're talking to our kids because we need somebody to take this on. We're getting old and tired. And so it's not that we've changed, but our imminent concern was to try and get the grazing going, but we didn't want to tie our hands completely because we care about this property and wanted it to, be cared for over the long term. You invest a lot of time into doing this invasive removal, then you want it to fall into the hands of people who are going to keep up that work.
So the timeline could be if you requested to have it rezoned resource conservation. I'm assuming it takes 2 council meetings for it to be approved. So that would be, our next meeting is
August 20th.
the
It's next
20th.
week, but that's,
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I guess we could do it next week, too. I mean, we could add an item to the agenda, but that wasn't the reason. Our next regular meeting is the 20th, and then the next meeting after that would be September 3rd. But I don't know if we have to put it in the newspaper and
I
how many
believe-
days.
Yeah, you gotta do all that jazz.
So we're probably talking 4 to 6 weeks. If she requests a rezone, is that,
Yeah, at least, yeah. It takes a little,
60 days.
it might be 60 days. That's probably,
September 17th is
I don't
probably the
have it
earliest
right in front of
council
me.
that could occur.
okay.
can
But
I,
if she requests that, the rezoning of that to resource conservation, and she also, I mean, we can't grant a special use permit yet because it's not resource conservation yet, so she would have to wait until it gets rezoned, although we could be ready for it as soon as that happened.
can I chime in
Yeah.
with one other thing? I just want to add, I guess, another option here to a multitude of options. If it were rezoned to our, resource conservation district, we could also amend, that district language is, short, but, I mean, you could also consider amending the resource conservation district to allow a one-family residence as a special use in conjunction with a grazing or whatever, in conjunction with, so, I mean, that would be another way to do that. Because I think your suggestion, Mayor, if I understood it correctly, was to potentially break off a few parcels in here, create some additional lots that would be rezoned to accommodate the single family. And if we did change the RC to a special use and allow a one-family residence, that would in some ways provide more of that flexibility. Maybe that goes on the northern part under water, under septic and sewer, or maybe it goes in the southern parcel hooked up to utilities. But that keeps the same 2 parcels in play, limits the total number of residents to 2, 1 in each parcel. Allows the grazing and everything else in resource conservation, which seems to be in line with, I think, what Kari's vision.
but would that allow for the buildings to be put up prior to residence?
I don't think that's an issue. You mean as far as the grazing and all that? I think that we're fine there if I'm reading it correctly, because it doesn't give us a lot of direction, but I think implicit in the fact that it says special uses and it talks about truck farming, orchards, et cetera. I think it's assumed that there would be some small, ancillary structures associated with that.
We can research that.
So, speaking of that, so it says an action item here, but in reality, do we want to just sort of table this until which time we come back with something? And then, in the meantime, you could do a little more research on, and obviously, Kari will talk to staff, and then maybe at our next planning commission.
I don't think that's what we're looking for, though, Pat, because we're trying to come to an agreement that we want to rezone this property, and the sooner we start the process of rezoning, so if Planning Commission would recommend to council the rezoning of this property to resource conservation, we could start right now. If we wait till our next Planning Commission meeting, then we're 60 days from that time frame.
But I don't think, are you gonna try to get any grazing in this year? No. So that may not be an issue then, time-wise.
I'd also like the option to speak with my husband. I mean, you guys can decide what you want, but I'm not sure how we're going to feel about this, so I got to talk to him about the details. So I guess my preference would be to be able to talk with staff a little bit longer, and I'd just like to know, like, if we did do that, which staff member would be our primary contact, if that would be Andrew, or if that would be this new Russ person. I haven't met him, or it's Kathy.
Well, that's
or
a
who.
great question, Kari, and I don't think that we can answer that at this time. I mean, Andrew's, our plan is to keep Andrew for the rest of the year, but we probably will have a city administrator in place in the near future, and he will decide how he wants to handle that department. So I can't really answer
If we bumped
that.
it off for another month, would Andrew be our primary contact?
He would be,
Okay, okay.
yeah.
I guess that would be my request, is maybe to bump it off and let us just talk about it and
Well,
save you guys.
I'll make a motion then that we table this issue.
I'll second it.
Motion by Fair, second by Keelan, that we table our action item tonight for the River's Edge request for grazing on the former Oz Natural Area property. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. All right.
Thank
We
you.
have no other discussion items. We have, do we have any update on the comprehensive plan and the zoning code to give us tonight?
And I don't have any real specific updates on that, other than maybe an opportunity to just reiterate or articulate what I think the plan is moving forward. If I understood it correctly, Mayor, and we're going to put both of these on hold until the new administrator comes on, and was that the understanding? Put them on the back burner? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't have anything else. I think that zoning code memo that Jeff did was pretty good. I don't know, what did he charge us for that? $1,400. I thought that was pretty good, and was really good, actually. So that gives you a great foundation for doing that zoning code rewrite when the time is right.
Great. Anybody else have any questions on that, on the updates, on the zoning code and the rewrite? If not, anything special you want to talk about the permits and the nuisance?
Not really. They'll probably just skip over the permitting and the nuisance. I mean, the items are in the packet here, or the listings is, so I guess I won't. I did put together a quick little report, and Justin, feel free to, I guess, chime in, but I guess I did put in, at the very end of this whole packet, I did do a little 1.25 page report that I thought might be good. And if you guys would like this, I can do this each month. But if it's not appropriate, I don't have to. Just giving you a little bit of an update on some of the other things that were going on out there. The Home and Away Ministries, I have had prepared a follow-up letter to send to the owner explaining the reasons for denial of the special use permit. The owner is under the impression that they still have a live project and are planning to move forward. So there's a bit of a disconnect here, and will likely be on a future meeting. The Waupaca Machine and Repair, we've been working directly with the owner now, Matt, on exploring options to meet his building plans. I'm going to be meeting with him tomorrow. There's some different options here, and that have come available for some different buildings out in the community that might be able to potentially accommodate what he wants to do there, including the spray painting. Project updates, I've reached out to him. I've got a meeting coming up with brothers at the Danes Hall. They're out of town. One of them was out of town, but we're going to start that conversation with Justin regarding the improvements outside the Danes Hall, the plaza area, and potential right-of-way improvements or vacations. And then potential projects, former St. Mary Magdalene's Church. We've been working at the staff level to review a couple preliminary conceptual ideas from Nino Pedrelli, the owner, and those will be coming forward to either Plan Commission or the council in the future for your review. So per a prior existing development agreement, Nino has till September here to come forward to the city with a proposal to redevelop that parcel. So he's got given us a couple options, and we're following up with him for more information before bringing that forward. Tower Ridge Apartments, S.C. Swiderski is the developer who's done the, who did those, what were those, 5-10 years ago, those apartments?
Those are the ones across from the golf course.
Yeah, on the north side. They, in their planned unit development or planned development that you guys, maybe some of you were involved with or approved, that identified commercial on that southern portion abutting the highway. They hadn't seen a lot of demand for that, and whereas they have seen more of a demand on the housing side. So they're interested in potentially doing a housing development, and as part of that, we're starting the discussions to look at a kind of a timeline for opening up that planned development, potentially amending that planned development to look at potential for housing there.
Is that single family or multifamily?
I think would be multifamily, similar to what they
Similar to
have.
what they have.
Yeah, similar product.
Is that part of the TIF? It's not, is it? Okay.
And they hadn't brought that up. I don't know if they plan to or not, but they have not brought that up. Wayfinding, Justin and I are on the one of the oversight committee for the wayfinding and branding project. And then I've been working with Dave Thiel and also Terry Schultz at the chamber on kind of restarting formalizing a business retention expansion program where we would get out more regularly as staff, proactively meet with businesses, introduce ourselves, help troubleshoot issues, be a little bit more proactive on some of these issues. So there you have it.
I like this, actually.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of good for me to read through
Sort
all
of like
that stuff and be
old
like, I'm not,
Just an update on
actually, I
old
am
business.
actually doing something here at work. Sometimes it feels like a lot of meetings, but
So move for adjournment.
Motion by Fair, second by Olson, that we adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. We are adjourned at 6:36 PM.